Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very special masterclass on setting SDR and AE goals that don't suck. We're joined by the man, the myth, the legend, the founder of Modern Sales Pros, Pete Kazanji. Pete, it's really exciting to have you here back with us. And I know it's been a little while since you've joined us. We do have an MSP tradition.
Oh, yeah?
All of our first-time solo panelists, they got to tell us a little bit about themselves. And what we want to know is any hobbies or skills, tricks that you've picked up since the start of the coronavirus pandemic.
I think we've gotten really good at homemade pizza making.
Homemade pizza making?
Yeah, that's like that was like our thing that we started doing a couple months ago. So Friday evening pizza night with my my wife and my 3-year-old. It's like a family event. It's kind of like, all right, we're gonna put a cap on the week. So we're pretty good at this pretty good at it at this point.
What's the go-to pizza in the Kazanji household? Do you have like one specialty?
We got an arsenal,
Ooh.
man. Yeah, we got a variety of different. It's less about the pizza, it's more about the toppings, right? So like I'm a big fan of making homemade Italian sausage. That's kind of like my little Zen thing. Take the ground pork and put all the spices in it or whatever. My son loves to help flip the little like sausage nuggets, etc. But like a variety of other things as well. White pizzas, red pizzas, all the pizzas. We're pretty good at it.
All the pizzas. This is amazing. Well, I know where I'm going to come once it's we're allowed to be together again. Pizza sounds delicious. For folks that are just rolling in here, we've got a poll going. That's going to help us get to know you. Obviously, today we're talking about SDR and AE goal setting. We'd love our audience members just to give yourself a quick rating here. Are you world class at setting your AE and SDR goals? And you're going to teach Pete something here today. Are you like not great, but not bad, kind of in the middle? Or are you someone that needs improvement and you're here because you want to learn and get some help? We'll give folks just another 30 seconds to get settled in here. And once again, really, really excited to be joined by Pete Kazanji, the founder of Modern Sales Pros. Pete, can you advance me one slide so I can share a little bit about the community with our audience?
Click.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, today's event is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros, founded by Pete Kazanji, as you may have heard. Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. Those are folks that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to help our community members answer the questions that they would otherwise struggle to solve on their own. That's through putting together amazing content programs like what we're going to talk about today, about AE and SDR goal setting. It's about bringing panels of experts together to talk about the most pertinent topics in sales today. It's also through our amazing online forum. For those of you who aren't members, you'll be invited to join afterwards, and we certainly hope you will. It's a very valuable resource, and you can get perspective from across all of these organizations that represent just a fraction of the 6,000 orgs that have members in MSP. And the great part about the community, when you ask a question, you do have about 20,000 other thought leaders in there who can help you. But enough about Modern Sales Pros. I'm really excited. Pete, advance the slides, please.
Click.
I am really, really excited to be chatting about this topic today. Pete is obviously a wealth of knowledge around goal setting. And this is important too, as most of us are going into annual planning or maybe starting to wrap it up, really understanding, all right, I've got a goal that I want to hit with my team. Man, I should probably make sure I'm setting that goal and tracking towards that goal and doing all the amazing things I need to do to make sure my team hits that goal. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete for an intro for those of you who don't know, and he's going to carry us forward through this amazing program today. Pete?
Thanks, Mr. MC Richard. Appreciate it. I'm super stoked to be doing this masterclass today because this is something that I think quite a bit about. We kind of live and breathe sales performance analysis and tied to that goals over here at Atrium. A little bit of background on me. So I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm the founder of Modern Sales Pros, but also the founder of Atrium, makers of sales performance analysis software. Prior to my stint at Atrium and Modern Sales Pros, I actually started a previous software company called Talent Bin, which is a recruiting software company. And that's actually where I first got into sales excellence, modern sales, if you will. I went from being the business generalist founder of Talent Bin. Previously, I had been a product marketer and product manager at VMware, and really went from that to kind of like, oh man, I got to sell this software stuff. How do I do that? Right. So our first rep, our first sales manager, our first sales leader at Talent Bin, and that's like really where I started to get imbued in sales, sales excellence. What kind of came out of that, in addition to Atrium and Modern Sales Pros, was also the book I wrote on startup sales and sales for founders called Founding Sales. But like, as you can tell, I kind of think about sales stuff just a little bit. Sales excellence, and specifically what we're going to be talking about today is sales performance analysis as relates to goals. We're going to skip this because this is the table of contents and things we're going to cover. It's here because we're going to send the slides out to everybody after the fact, but we've got a lot to cover, and Rich is going to be chatting at me to make sure I don't, I'm not going too slow here. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about goals. All right. Why do we do goals? Well, there's kind of two reasons though as to why we do goals. One, generally speaking, we want to win. You want to win a game, you want to hit your number, etc. But the problem with those sort of things is that that as a goal is too monolithic. It's too large, right? And so what we need to be able to do is to break down a large monolithic goal into smaller precursor goals. And that way we can make sure that we're actually on our way to achieving the much larger goal. So that allows us to focus on the right quantity and quality of work, in this case, gameplay, sports metaphor. And if we do that, the score will take care of itself. The great book by Bill Walsh called The Score Will Take Care of Itself, that's literally focused on exactly this. So let's kind of like use as an example here what this looks like in sports as a way by which to analogize to sales. So we've got our outcomes, where our ultimate outcome is our win. We want to win. But then of course there's precursors to that. Runs, basketball, we got points, football, we got points as well. But then there's all sorts of different inputs that we'd want to instrument. So in baseball, that might be hits, bases, extra base hits. From a defensive standpoint, that might be strikeouts versus walks, strikes versus balls, pickoffs, et cetera. And then there's also, of course, efficiency stuff, batting average, on base percentage. In basketball, that'd be shooting percentage. And then you've got more basic things like shooting percentage, batting average. And then we have like advanced stuff like wins against replacement, rebound rates, QB rating, et cetera. And so the whole idea here is that by getting really granular, it allows us to measure these inputs. And then the second thing too is that we can actually instrument humans at this level, right? The individuals who make out that ultimate output of our gameplay, if you will, in order to understand like, oh yeah, you know what, so-and-so is doing a great job. He's getting lots of hits. You know, the other batter, Joe, he's not doing as well. His batting average is low, right? His on base percentage is low. And so the reason why it's important for us to be able to get human is because that's where we can intervene and fix things. Okay, so how do we do that? So great pitch, Pete. I get it. I got to get granular so I can change things with my humans, my SDRs, my AEs, et cetera. All right, how do we do this? Well, it's kind of a 6-step process. First, we have to select the metrics that are going to matter, and we're going to cover all these different steps. 2, we got to collect the data such that we can make sure that we can actually measure these metrics. 3, we got to set some goals on those metrics such that we can then understand if we're progressing towards them. Next, we have to visualize those in order to understand, okay, great. Are we progressing? Are we actually progressing towards these goals that we set? Do we have some sort of issue that needs to be investigated? Next, we actually have to distribute these visualizations because creating a bunch of dashboarding, a bunch of reporting, what have you, never paying attention to it, kind of doesn't help us. And then lastly, we actually have to then reason against this, troubleshoot and resolve the issues that we find through the consumption of these distributed visualizations. So it's a 6-step process there. And this is kind of what we like to think about it as kind of a Maslow's hierarchy of performance analysis excellence. So know what metrics to track, collect our data, build our reporting, set those goals, and then on an ongoing basis, monitor, identify aberrations, and then diagnose and coach. So let's talk about metric selection first. Some principles on this. So first things first, in order to select relevant metrics, you got to think about who are the teams we're going to be instrumenting, right? So the metrics are going to be different, whether we're talking about SDRs versus AEs. Metrics are going to be different if we're talking about SMB AEs versus enterprise AEs. They're going to be different, a little bit different if we're talking about inbound SDRs versus outbound SDRs. So a really good way to kind of think about this is, well, what do these folks spend their time doing? Right? Are they a linebacker and we're expecting them to do lots of tackling? Are they a wide receiver and we're expecting them to do lots of running and catching things? What do they spend their time doing? Because those are the things that we're going to want to instrument. Those are the metrics we're going to want to track. Importantly, what I would say to folks, I missed the poll here earlier, but I think what I pretty much saw was that no one said that we're a class, which is good. Humility is important because that way we can learn. And I think we had like a 50-50 split between people being like, yeah, I'm okay, and other people being like, oh my God, the worst. And so importantly, what you can do is like, you can start basic. It's okay to start basic, and then we can get more advanced. The worst thing in the world you could possibly do is try to boil the ocean and be like, oh yeah, we need to have meetings about meetings about meetings about meetings in order to understand which metrics we're going to track. And then 2 months later, we're like, okay, we still have no idea what's going on with our reps. Like, at least, like, just start. Even if it's just like marking things on a whiteboard. I guess we don't do that anymore if we're not in the office. a digital whiteboard that you distribute, just start. And also just don't overthink it. Oftentimes what ends up happening, and this is there's probably a number of sales operations people who are on this call right now. For folks who want to really get it right, want to really do it up big, oftentimes what ends up happening is people really overthink this stuff. There are lots of well-worn conventions that you can index off of, the same way that baseball teams, basketball teams, football teams, they don't go off and like invent their own metrics. There's a bunch of generally accepted metrics to pay attention to, and you can index off of those rather than having to go and reinvent the wheel. It turns out that an AE over in this organization engages in very similar behaviors to an AE in this organization, the same with SDR. So just rely on the generalized KPIs there, and you're going to be fine. So what are those recommended metrics? Well, these are some ones that are probably good to think about. In SDR, they're going to be kind of more activity-based. Things like email volume, calls, maybe the unique number of contacts that have been engaged in a given point in time or given time period, unique accounts, maybe new accounts and new contacts that somebody has interacted with. These are inputs. Outputs, of course, would be meetings created, ops created, pipe created, booking source. This is usually a little bit more of a sophisticated output to measure. Oftentimes we're like, all right, are they creating ops? But ultimately, what we want our SDRs to be doing is creating bookings for our sales organization. And then there's efficiency and quantities as well. So like email responsiveness rates, touches per account, win rate on source stops, ASP on source stops. Again, don't if you're seeing some of these metrics and you're like, oh my gosh, how would I even calculate win rate on source stops? Don't worry about it. We can start with these sort of basics and then advance from there. AE land. So outputs are obviously going to be bookings, but maybe not just bookings, maybe wins, right? Maybe opportunity advancement. Maybe it's expected revenue by close date, looking out into the future. And then one of the things that organizations oftentimes really kind of fall down on is not instrumenting inputs on account executives well enough. So yeah, we talk about pipe coverage or maybe opportunity ownership, but are you paying attention to things like new opportunity zone in a given month or a quarter, or new pipe own? Something as straightforward as customer facing meeting volume, maybe first meetings as distinct from just general meetings. And then oftentimes what people will say is, yeah, you know what, I'm just measuring my AEs on outputs. Well, guess what? It turns out that AEs also have to be high activity. And so maybe what we wouldn't be doing is measuring how many emails they're doing in a day or emails that they're doing in the week, but understanding how many unique accounts AEs are interacting with or how much email volume that they're engaged in is actually important, because that's kind of how we sell nowadays. And so missing out on instrumenting more granular these inputs is something that people can get tripped up on. Cool. And this is just a visualization of how the different metrics that you could be paying attention to in order to understand both outputs and then upstream inputs. Same with SDR land. Okay, cool. So that's metric selection. Great. Well, maybe we start out, we say, hey, these are the metrics that we're going to be collecting, or sorry, the metrics that we're going to be tracking. Let's talk about data collection. So in order to actually track those metrics, we oftentimes we have to capture information in order to be able to measure those metrics. In general, what you want to think about is, what am I trying to measure? So those metrics that we selected earlier. And then what we want to do is, to the extent possible, automating data collection is very helpful, because the more requirements you put on your reps in order to collect data and put information into the CRM, the more they're going to hate you, and the more your data is going to be dirty, because people are going to be missing it, or you're going to lock down your CRM with like tons of validation rules. And so just as much as possible, think about how you can automate data collection. Obviously, there's a number of sales engagement tools out there that make for really easy data collection. So email, calling, meeting data into the relevant system that you're going to be measuring that off of. Cool. So if we got our metrics selected and we've got our data being captured, well, what about goal setting? So this is where things, this is where kind of like the weird alchemy comes in. And so a couple of ways to think about goal setting. It's not like one and done. Like, you can't just start out top down and say, you know what, this is the number we have to hit. So, and then cascade down from there, because that may not actually align with the ground truth of work on of levels of activity that can be doable at the ground level. So really what you have to do is you have to blend things together. So these are the ways that I like to mix these things together. So first, a really great way of understanding what appropriate goals are would be historical performance. So if you can look at your historical performance of your middle or upper middle reps to inform reasonable goals, that can be helpful. Secondarily, though, what you want to mix that with is like a bottoms up calculation. So it might turn out that your AEs have historically had 7 customer facing meetings a week, 7 or 10 customer facing meetings a week. But then when you actually get down to it and you think about how much time there is in a week, right? What other things that they're engaged in, it might turn out that probably maybe having more like 10 or 12 or 14 customer facing meetings per week might make more sense. Or maybe conversely, historically your AEs have owned a certain number of ops, but then when you break it down to actually how many customer facing meetings it takes in order to execute against an op appropriately, it turns out that maybe your reps have been overloaded. They've had 50 ops concurrently, but based on how many customer facing meetings it takes to execute an op, maybe they should only be having like 30. And then lo and behold, when you go and look at it, maybe that's why you have so many untouched opportunities and so many stuck ops, because the reps don't have enough time in the day in order to manage all those ops. So bottoms up ends up being an important thing as well. Next, you can have benchmarks. So there's some great folks out there who publish benchmarks on what good metrics levels are. It's important to understand, to make sure to compare apples to apples there, such that you're actually comparing SMB AEs to SMB AEs, mid-market AEs to mid-market AEs. Make sure that you're having a similar sales motion, for instance. You can't just comparing mid-market AEs and say, gosh, marketing operations sale will probably be pretty different than comparing mid-market AEs who are selling into dev tools, for instance. So if you're going to do benchmarks, which can be very helpful in combination with these other things, just make sure that you're actually comparing apples to apples and not apples to pineapples, because you potentially can get yourself into trouble there. And so then what you're going to do is you're going to just blend this and iterate this, right? So it's not going to be perfect. We're going to pull this together. We're going to kind of squint and go like, yeah, that smells good. And then we're going to publish them and say, great, these are defensible. I didn't just make these up. What do these look like? So these can be ones. These are some examples here. So for AEs, so meetings, emails, new ops, total ops, total pipe. You can see for some of these, there's some pretty substantial swings here. And the same for SDR. So email volumes per week. Actually, and then it's important to think about what the interval, the measurement interval is on these as well. Cool. So now we got our goal set. Great. How do we know if we're getting there? Visualizations. Got to make sure we can actually see what's going on. So a couple of things to think about here. One is, what are these reports and dashboards for? And so really easy, a really helpful rule of thumb is think about a report as answering a specific question. Like, how many ops have the SDRs created so far this month? That'd be a very specific question that would be answered by a report. Or how many ops does each AE own right now? Again, another report. So one report, two reports. Then think of dashboards, collections of reports, as being for we use this thing to consume a bunch of different questions, to ask and verify a bunch of different questions at a given point in time. So as an example, this dashboard is used in AE one-on-ones. This dashboard is used at noon every day to see if the SDRs are performing against their metrics. The worst thing you can do is have like the God dashboard that has like 80 tiles on it. It's like, oh, where's that KPI that I'm supposed to be paying attention to? Right, so reports, what question am I answering? A dashboard is, I'm using this to consume something at this point. I'm using this for this meeting to answer these set of questions at this point in time. Another thing you're going to want to think about is multiple views per metric. So it's not sufficient to have like, hey, this is the total number of ops that each AE owns right now, but also frequently you're going to want to have a trend in order to understand, okay, are we trending up? Are we trending down? Cool. Ways to do this, some common ways of going about visualizations to track these goals would be CRM reporting. Obviously, most of the folks in MSP are using Salesforce with a smattering of HubSpot CRM. So in CRM reporting is pretty straightforward. It's nice because it's just sitting there. It's already in your CRM. The downside is it requires really good data collection, and you got to build everything. BI can be helpful too. So more substantial, kind of like Looker, Tableau, etc. Really powerful, can do snapshot of data over time, can mix different data sources together. Usually the challenges associated with that is like a pretty heavy lift to set up, requires a lot of data engineering, etc. And then what ends up happening there is that you get, normal human beings, as I like to refer to it, versus kind of like BI wizards oftentimes struggle to consume and manipulate that information. And then lastly, there's purpose-made performance analysis software. This is something like Atrium. This is like the type of software that we make. The upsides of these solutions is that they work out of the box. Like in our case, it takes 90 seconds to turn Atrium on. We've got pre-baked reporting, and it really reduces the burden on like sales operations or data teams in order to like serve data to managers and what have you. The downsides of these though is that they're a little bit more constrained in what you can do, because it's not like CRM reporting or BI where you can build anything you want as long as you can build it. It's usually a little bit more constrained to the core KPIs that matter there. And yeah, this is an advertisement for Atrium. So we make sales performance analysis software that instruments quantity and quality of rep selling activity. It takes 2 minutes to set up. It's pretty rad. We like it. So it's it allows you to understand, it allows your managers to understand exactly how the reps are doing and how your SDRs, AEs, et cetera, are doing, and allows you to jump in and get ahead of potential problems before it's too late. Cool. So let's look at what some of these visualizations might look like. So let's look at AE core activity here. So like an example of something we might want to pay attention to is we set a goal on customer facing meetings per rep, right, per AE. All right, wonderful. Well, maybe we should have a trend of that. And that way, what that's going to allow us to do is say, hey, how are we doing over time, right? This rep right here looks like he's tailing off. That's the sort of thing that this visualization is going to allow us to do. Versus, hey, we have an expectation in a month that we're going to have, I don't know, let's look at these guys, 40 customer facing meetings per month. And how are we trending towards that? Right? Same might be true for opportunity ownership, pipeline ownership, pipeline into the future, current pipeline. You can also set goals around things like pipeline hygiene. So, hey, how are we doing with our untouched opportunities? Are any reps in particular being pretty bad, not paying attention, not managing their pipe well? And you can do the same thing in ramping too. Hey, how are we ramping? Is anybody like not ramping into band with respect to pipeline ownership? And then what you do is you compose a dashboard of those. So for instance, like, you might have a last week results, month in progress dashboard. So that has maybe last week bookings so far this month, wins last week, wins this month, meetings last week, meetings this month. You can kind of understand how these mix together in order for us to understand, okay, how are we progressing? How do we do last week? How are we progressing towards our goals? This would be different potentially than the set of KPIs that you would put together for an AE one-on-one. That might be more things like, hey, do you have enough opportunities right now? Are you neglecting them? How are your untouched ops, etc. So again, different set of questions being answered for a different purpose. And of course, you can do a tabular view of this as well. So instead of doing a more graphical visualized view, you could do a tabular view to say, hey, how do we do on our, like we set these goals on a weekly basis. We're supposed to have fewer than 15 untouched ops, and we're supposed to send 100 customer facing emails, and we're supposed to have 12 meetings on the calendar. Well, guess what? We almost made our email goal. Oh my goodness gracious, we need to clean out our pipe because 53 untouched ops is pretty ridiculous. And hey, high five. 19 meetings on a 12 meeting goal. That's pretty fantastic. Oh, and look, here's how we're tracking towards our monthly goals. Great. So that's visualization. So now let's talk about distribution. So you can't, one of the jokes I like to say is it's like a tree falling in the woods and no one's around. An SDR performance dashboard that nobody looks like, that nobody looks at. Do we know if the SDRs are actually doing any work? And so the important thing is we got to distribute and consume these KPIs. So some thoughts on distribution. Couple of ways of doing this. A really great way to distribute and make sure that, especially in a virtualized world like we're all somewhat working in right now, great way to distribute this information is just to use URLs. So most solutions, whether you're talking about like Salesforce dashboarding or Salesforce reports or dashboards or even Atrium, usually a report or a dashboard will have a unique URL. So just get those URLs everywhere, bookmark them, put them into calendar events. If you have an agenda document that you use for your team meetings, one-on-ones, etc., get that link in there, right? Bookmark it in your browser, etc. Also distribute or email broadcast, Slack broadcast. A lot of these tools have the ability to distribute this information that way as well. So just get it out there, because we got to have, if we're going to see something wrong, we got to have our eyes on it. And the only way we can have our eyes on it is to make sure that it's being distributed to us and habitually being consumed. Because otherwise, if it's like sitting in the closet or sitting in the drawer, we have no idea that that account executive has, what was it, 50 untouched ops that we need to clean out. Some other kind of distribution mechanisms, TVs. I've always kind of been negative on, TV dashboards or whatever, largely just because they kind of just get ignored. They kind of act like wallpaper. And especially now, a lot of organizations not in their offices, kind of double demonstrates kind of like the futility of that. Another way you can do this as well is to, especially for executive audiences, is put metrics together in a deck, usually on a recurring basis. And then also oftentimes you can have alerting for anomalies and things like that. Like I know this is certainly something that Atrium does quite a bit about. Tableau as well allows you to do some kind of threshold alerting, anomaly alerting. But yeah, so, and then lastly, good old fashioned meetings. Making sure that you're bringing data into your meetings makes it such that you're making sure that people have eyes on these things, and conveniently you have the people there who you would need to discuss this with. Oftentimes what you want to do and take action on, oftentimes what you want to do is make sure that the data that's being brought into the meeting aligns with the agenda. So like we were looking at previously, we had these two different dashboards. We had like a team meeting dashboard that had last week's progress and then the month or last week's outcomes and the month in progress, versus an AE one-on-one where we're talking about a different set of things. So you just want to make sure that the data that you're bringing into these meetings is aligned with the agenda. Another thing that's important is to make sure that actually you as a manager are consuming this information ahead of time. So one of the things that I like to do is I have our sales team meetings on Mondays from 11:30 to 12:30, and I actually have a recurring calendar invite for myself at 10 to 10:15, where what I do is I actually go through our metrics in order to understand what's happening and see how we hit our goals or didn't hit our goals and how we're trending. So that way, when I show up to that meeting, I know what we're going to talk about and I populate our agenda off versus having to do that analysis real time while hanging out with 12 AEs and SDRs who are all kind of like, all right, what are we talking about here, Pete? Another thing that you can do is what I like to do also is a non-meeting recurring calendar event. So I actually have a couple of different recurring 15-minute blocks on my own calendar to look at to answer a couple different questions. So for instance, I have 4 account executives who are ramping right now. One of the things I have is I have a very specific ramping dashboard that I put together in Atrium that I have a reminder for myself at 10 o'clock every Thursday to go look at that. So the dashboard broadcasts to me at 10 o'clock that day, but then also I have a meeting reminder. It's just a 15-minute reminder. Be like, hey, Pete, you're supposed to go and look at at how everybody's ramping right now. And the hyperlink is in that meeting invite, click on it, boom, you can check it out. Oh, is there anything that needs to happen? Nope, okay, great. Or, oh, yeah, I do need to work on something, and then I can act accordingly. Just a little bit of an example of how I like to do this in meeting invites, kind of what distribution of URLs in a meeting invite can look like there. And then this is just an example cadence of a sales organization with a variety of meetings. So Monday morning sales team meeting, bunch of stand-ups, pipe review midweek. So kicks off at the beginning of the month, doing a retro on the previous month. Week 2, getting into the swing of things, starting to close some deals. Week 3, approaching the end of the month. Does anybody need to like really buckle down and get things going? Obviously, this is a monthly sales organization, like a monthly based operating rhythm. And then, all right, last week of the month, better hustle, folks. This is now or never. Cool. And then these are kind of what the agendas on some of those meetings would look like. But importantly, the agenda and the data that is brought into it should be in alignment. Cool. Well, what about when things go weird? What about when the shit hits the fan? How do you deal with goals when something has changed? Well, you have to adjust to that new reality. Hopefully your new reality is like Zoom's new reality or Mural's new reality or Mira's new reality, where you have a nice tailwind. Unfortunately, that's not the case for everybody. But importantly, what you have to do is you have to say, great, something changed. Cool. Like the physics of the world have changed for us in some sort of capacity. Great. First, we got to figure out new baselines. We're going to figure out what the new, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to say this, the new normal looks like. And then what we have to do is set new goals off of that. Just like we talked about before about how to set goals, we're essentially doing the same thing. We're saying, hey, something has changed substantially, and we have to reassess what our priors kind of look like there. And then we have to enforce those new baselines. So the way that you would do this would be for the AEs, it would just be revenue formula, at least to start. Just see, hey, what is this? What do our KPIs or what are the benchmarks? Sorry, what do our new reality of these KPIs look like now that something has changed? SDR, the same thing. Note that you need to have some sort of sampling period or an appropriate level of an appropriate sampling period to understand what that new baseline would look like. For AEs, that's probably like at least one sales cycle, maybe long, maybe more. For SDRs, that'll be quicker. So just some examples here. This is actually anonymized Atrium data here. And what you can kind of see here is this is a sales organization. This was back in March. You can see that their volume, this was their volume of customer first meetings went from around 20 for the team per week to about half of that. Right, so this is an eight person mid-market AE team. This is an SDR team, and their response rate, their email response rate, went from around 10-ish% or so to around 6%. Right? And so what you need to do is reassess that on a, for the revenue formula, for the SDR formula, and say, hey, great. Previously, the old KPI was this. What is the new appropriate KPI? If all of a sudden it turns out that it's twice as hard for our SDRs to get new meetings and populate and create new ops for our AEs, well, we probably have to re-baseline our expectations for our new opportunities showing up into AE pipelines. Or if all of a sudden, budgets have gotten 100% tighter, what does that do for our win rate? Did our win rate go from 18% to maybe now more around 10%? Did our ASP drop? Did our deal cycle extend out as a result of people really scrutinizing new purchases? We have to understand what that new KPI is, and then act accordingly. And the same with SDRs. Right? Is it way harder? Are people not taking new meetings? So now it's harder for us to get opportunity creations out of accounts engaged with. We have to do more activities in order to create a given opportunity because people aren't responding to us. So we just have to understand what those precursors look like, and go from there. So when we're thinking about sampling periods, a way to think about that is you want the appropriate amount of time to pass in order to understand, like, yeah, actually that's probably pretty valid. So the good news is the more reps you have, like the larger the number of SDRs or AEs, the faster you're going to be able to understand what that looks like, because you have a much higher sampling amount. If your sales motion velocity is faster, you'll be able to understand what these changes look like more quickly, versus if your sales motion is maybe a little bit slower, then it's going to take you a little bit longer in order to understand what the new normal looks like. Also, precursor KPIs, you're going to be able to see changes very quickly, like email response rate. You're going to be able to understand what has changed very quickly. The ability of AEs or AE conversion rate on ops from stage 1 to stage 2 or stage 2 to stage 3, that information will be much more quickly available than what does our win rate look like more broadly. So some examples of what that looks like here as well. So yeah, this is the SDR email engagement rate, opportunity creation, change. Probably like in this case, probably a few more weeks of data would be helpful here in order to understand what kind of the new baseline looks like. customer-facing meeting volume, et cetera. The other thing that you want to understand is that you actually want to make sure that it's actually an average, because unfortunately what can happen when you're doing this is you can have changes amongst a couple of reps that potentially can pull down what appears to be the team average, or conversely, you might have one like very high performer who's outperforming everybody else, and so you really just want to make sure that it's actually it's actually an average as opposed to, or I guess in this case would be like more of a median than an average, because you want it to be attainable. So like lastly, this is an example of win rate changing over time. This is a 100 rep AE team. So by virtue of the fact that 100 reps closing business on a weekly basis, you're probably going to be able to see some actionable data in a pretty quick fashion. And so then once you have those precursors understood, the next thing would be to then cascade that to the rest of the organization. So for instance, if we understand and the rest and your operating model, so now that can mean great. It looks like it turns out we're going to be able to have fewer new opportunities are going to be able to be coming into account executive pipelines. All right, well, if that's the case, we probably need to rebase quotas, unless you can magically figure out a way of getting more ops into our AEs pipelines. If it just turns out that that prospects are not setting meetings with SDRs, then or sorry, they're setting meetings with SDRs at a 50% clip as compared to previously. Unless we can somehow magically have our SDRs do twice as much work, which we might be able to if they previously were operating at a more slack pace, but probably highly unlikely. We'll probably need to think about what the implications of that are for the SDR's opportunity creation quota. And so this is kind of some examples of what that would look like. So, if you have a model, and there's actually this links to a model right here, if the number of new ops that is coming in an AE pipe goes from 10 to 5, now we're going to have a way different bookings expectation than we previously had. And same with SDR. Cool. Home stretch here. So now let's talk about troubleshooting and resolution. So the whole idea here around goal setting, monitoring those goals, monitoring of KPIs is so we can actually act. The whole point of this is to act. This goes back to the very first part that we were talking about. We want goals so we can be granular and so we can be human. The reason why is because we can say, hey, starting pitcher, I need you to throw more strikes. I need you to throw more first pitch strikes, right? Hey, basketball player, I need you to get back on defense, right? Because you're not getting the number of rebounds that you normally are. Hey, SDR, your volume of activity is lower than it needs to be. I need you to pick it up a notch. Hey, AE, I noticed that your untouched opportunities is way higher than what our goal is set. We need to block time on your calendar for pipeline management. So that is the data-driven management loop that's happening there, which is we observe something, we figure out what's wrong, and then we act. We communicate a need for resolution. I need you to do more work. We need to work together on our messaging. We need to work on setting next meetings at the end of your disco calls. And then importantly, what you need to do is then loop back in order to understand, did it happen? Hey, AE, I see that you have way more untouched opportunities than you're supposed to have because we set a goal of less than 5 untouched opportunities at any given point in time, and you've got 20 right now. What I need you to do is go through those untouched opportunities, close out the ones that are dead, and then engage the ones that are still live. And then next Monday, we're going to come together, and the goal is for that number to be under 5. Right? So let's loop back on that. And this is why an operating rhythm with metrics and goals, goal presentation layered into it is very helpful, because as time progresses, lo and behold, we have a touch point to do these actions, to do these acts of management. So that's what we need to do. So when you're looking for, so how do you find issues? Well, a couple of different things. One, you can look for shifts. So as you can kind of see here, Brer Rabbit seems to be degrading a little bit here. And so, and moreover, it looks like the entire team is degrading. So that actually might indicate something is amiss with the team. These two individuals right here were previously already low, but on the flip side, this rep right here, Queen of Hearts, well, she's actually continues to outperform. So what by looking for these aberrations and shifts, we can say, hey, is there something that this person is engaging in that can allow us, that we can broadcast to everybody else? Hey guys, Queen of Hearts is doing XYZ in order to keep her calendar full. We're all gonna focus on doing that this week and next week in order to see if we can drive our customer facing meeting volume higher, right? And the same with a tabular view as well. You can use those goals that you set in order to say, hey, where was our issue? Oh, well, we're a little bit light on customer facing meals. Great. Please do more activity. Oh my goodness, we are so high on on pipe management, or we are so behind the 8 ball on pipe management that, you know, I'm going to need you to calendar an entire day to clean out your pipe, because right now that's just BS. And again, you can do the same thing by looking at these by looking at, when you're troubleshooting these things, what you can do is you can, what we like to call, go right. So if you see an issue with bookings, if you want to understand what the root cause is, what are the precursors to that? Is it a lack of wins? Or is the number of wins the same as normal, but ASP has fallen down? Or are the number of wins and ASP actually fine as compared to usual? It's just that the deal cycle is trailing out. Okay, if it turns out that, let's say, ASP is the thing that's the culprit, well, what's the precursor to that? Is it because the rep is engaging with too small of an average opportunity size? Is it because they're discounting? And so when you identify something, a precursor, like meetings or wins or bookings, if you can go right, if you will, and go upstream, what that can allow you to do is diagnose what the actual root cause is and then address that. Oh, hey, I noticed your win rate has deteriorated. And it looks like that might be due to the fact that your opportunity or your pipeline management is atrocious, as indicated by the fact that you have 50 untouched ops in your pipe. Maybe what we need to do is some coaching and some calendar management to make sure that you have on Tuesdays and on Thursdays, you have an 1.5 hour long block where you're supposed to go through and make sure that you're on top of your pipe. And we're going to work on that together, right? Data-driven management. And the same with SDRs as well. Wonderful. And I think that's actually, I guess I'm missing the slide. Oh, here it is. There we are. Great. I think we made it. Richard, did we make it?
Pete, that was phenomenal, on time, on message, and everything.
I was working to be on time. I was like, oh my God.
I love it. In fact, you were 2 minutes early. You threw a whole lot down. So first and foremost, thank you for sharing all that.
You bet.
For our audience members, there's a bunch of questions in the Q&A panel. Pete, I'm gonna start reading these off to you here. And as our audience submits other questions, we'll take as many of these as we can. We've only got Pete for another about 10 minutes here. So first question, and this great question coming in from Eric Cheng. So he says, you know, we're in such a volatile time. How do you know when the SDRs are at capacity in booking meetings? And then if they're at capacity, should you just hire more SDRs, or do you start to adjust quota? What do you think about that, Pete?
I think so. Essentially what Eric is talking about, let me just go back here. Eric, what you're talking about is the notion of like, is actually a goal setting question, right? So how do I identify that the SDRs are at capacity? Okay. Well, one way we would do that is by looking at a bottoms up approach. So there's actually a link here, and let me just kick it into the chat This is an SDR panelists and attendees. Click. Cool. So this is a model whereby you can say, hey, how many contacts do I want my SDRs to be engaged with? How many touch points do I want them to put on those contacts? How many contacts per account do I want them? And then how frequently do I want them engaged with those contacts over time? And then how long does it take to do an email engagement? Does it take 5 minutes because you're customizing it? Or can you send a couple hundred emails a day because you're just automating the heck out of it? Although you'll probably see that in your email response rates. So by breaking that down and going bottoms up, what that allows you to do is actually understand, are our SDRs at the level of performance, or at the level, are they capped out in terms of inputs? Because if they are, yeah, then we would probably want to hire more SDRs. If they're not, and it turns out when you do that calculus, you're like, wait a minute, the SDRs are sending 50 customer facing emails a day. When I do the math, and I say, hey, it should take you 5 minutes to do an email, or 5 minutes to do each email. It turns out that only accounts for like 3 or 4 hours of their day. Well, what are the other 4 hours being used for? So that's the way I would go about addressing that.
I think it's a fun activity to do too. When you start to break down, you can start to see where there's some gaps or some training opportunities for the team.
For sure.
Another question, and you talked about this relatively, right? You talked about this when when the stuff hits the fan. Natalie's questions: how frequently do you update goals or quotas for your team? Is there anything, any standard guidance you have on that? And for reference, Natalie's organization has quarterly quotas for AEs and then monthly goals for meeting setting for the SDRs.
Yeah. So I think the frequency of goal shifting, if you will, or like goal resetting, generally speaking, organizations typically do that yearly. But usually what I would do is like do it at least yearly. But then if you see something where you're like, wait a minute, all the SDRs are at 130% of goal. Huh. Maybe that goal is too low. Right? And so I think that the answer to that question is, doing this analysis right here, this entire rigmarole, it's not nothing. So you're not going to be wanting to do that like every quarter. It'll consume a ton of time, but you want to make sure that at least you're adjusting to new information that's showing up in the world. Whether that's like, hey, it turns out that wow, look at that, win rates are going up over time because of all of our marketing investment, or because we have tons and tons of customers now who are telling each other how much they love your solution. Oh, interesting. Well, maybe we should raise quotas a little bit there, because if it turns out that win rates are like 25% or 50% higher than they used to be, maybe before they were 15%, now they're 25%. Well, with the same number of opportunities, we probably would expect way more bookings out of our reps. So doing it at least yearly allows you to kind of like capture that information, the new state of the world. But then if you see something that makes you think like, okay, wait a minute, it might be time for like an interrupt-based goal reset, whether that's on the upside, like we were saying before, oh wow, all the SDRs are at 130% of goal, or the flip side, hey, look, turns out there's a bunch of like economic wobbliness and everybody's underperforming. Maybe we should maybe we should reassess and reset goals right now.
I think it's a great question. And Pete, a lot of context there. I think what's also important, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to have kind of the harness in place so you're collecting some of this data, so that sure, if economic uncertainty happens, or if you see your reps, you can kind of go right on that and go, well, why is this happening? Do we need to hire more, or is this just a fluke in something that's going on in macroeconomic conditions?
Yeah, and that goes back to the operating rhythm, right? So like if you have this stuff in place, if you have these things in place and you are consuming them weekly, like the first week, you're like, wow, so this is weird. We don't have any first meetings. Next week, like, whoa, we still don't have any first meetings. That's weird. What's going on here? Third week. Okay, cool. We need to dig in here. What's going on?
Yeah.
Versus waiting 60 days and being like, oh, I guess we didn't have any bookings. Oh, that's weird. Right.
We
like
didn't close,
this is why being
any deals.
granular. Yeah, this is why being granular and instrumenting precursors is so powerful.
Yep. A couple more questions here, and we got a little bit of time left, Pete. One question, and there's a couple folks that want an answer to this. Any tips or tricks for folks to automate some of the data collection or outbound activity tracking back into Salesforce?
Oh yeah, I mean so it depends on like how gnarly you want to get. There's a couple of different ways of skinning this cat. One is your sales engagement solution. So whether you use like SalesLoft or Outreach or Mixmax or Groove or what have you, generally speaking, those should be capturing that data and pushing it into the CRM. If not, just just ping your CSM and be like, hi, fix this. Because these are all fantastic solutions that'll help you with that. The other nice thing, of course, is, and like this is an Atrium plug, when you have sales performance analysis software that is just focused purely on this, it actually does the automated data capture for you. So like in our case, we hook into the email system, the calendar system, the CRM. So you don't have to worry about that logging because we just grab that information anyway. It doesn't help you necessarily with getting the data into the CRM, but if you're just trying to answer, are my SDRs engaged in the sufficient quantity and quality of activity? Are my AEs engaged in sufficient quantity and quality of activity? That's where this is a pretty compelling solution. But generally speaking, your sales engagement solution should also at least allow you to get email and calling data into the CRM.
Another question here, Pete, and this is actually more on the founding sales side of things, right? Startup, really small, under 10 employees, trying to figure out how to set goals and metrics in just a generally early stage or high growth or highly ambiguous environment.
Mm-hmm. How to do that?
Yeah, advice, really.
Yeah, so I think this is why, and actually I have a deck on this. Here, let me drop this in the chat. So this is a deck on what I call founder-led selling maturity stages. This is essentially like a slide version of slide and text version of my book on startup sales. But one of the reasons why it's really powerful, it's important to start with like a founder selling or an early evangelical seller who's getting to success before you go and hire a bunch of reps, is because then at least you have baseline metrics off of that person. Like I'll use me as an example. When I first started selling Atrium back in 2018, we looked at my win rates, we looked at my ASPs, we looked at my meeting volumes, et cetera. And so then when we started hiring some reps, the beginning of 2019, we at least knew like, all right, Pete's a mediocre salesperson at best, but if he can close ops at 15% close rate with a 15K ASP, doing 10 customer facing meetings a week because he's got a bunch of the other stuff that he's working on as well. Well, presumably we should probably be able to get our reps to perform at that level of performance, or maybe even better, because they're not mediocre sales reps, they're actually high quality sales reps, unlike Pete. And so you can actually, like, at least you have some historical performance to base that off of. But this is where kind of like mixing it together and then kind of blending and iterating it becomes really important. And actually mixing that with the previous question that somebody had around how frequently would you update goals. If you're in a situation like that, well, probably you're gonna be like reassessing all the time. You're like, are these goals right? Are these goals right? Are these goals right? Are these goals right? As you get more and more information, which is all the more important. Why it's all the more important to make sure that you have a good metrics harness in place in order to understand, like, oh, look, win rates are trending up over time. That's fantastic. I guess we're getting better at selling. I guess we're getting better. I guess the product is getting better. Let's hire some more sales reps and maybe raise their quotas.
It's a great deck. I would encourage everybody to take a spin through it. It'll make you a better business person, in addition to answering some of these very specific questions about the really early stage build out. Pete, we're at time.
Uh-oh.
We're at time, man. Thank you so much. I know you're incredibly busy. You've got 17 jobs that you got going on at any given point in time. Thanks for both founding the Modern Sales Pros community that's grown into such a wonderful resource, and also sharing your time with us. This was really thought-provoking, really solid first principles. Thank you again for that, Pete.
You are welcome. It was awesome to hang out with the entire MSP community. I'll see you guys soon. And we'll send the recording out and the deck out.
Yeah,
too.
recording and deck, all that'll be available about 24 hours afterwards. So with that, Pete, thank you on behalf of everybody who attended here, the 20,000 folks in the community, and Gina and the team behind the scenes. This was awesome, man. Thank you.
Wonderful. See you soon.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.